What's up, guys? I am wilderness ultramarathon runner, lifelong martial artist, and historical researcher James Pratt. And today I'm going to teach you how to build yourself a Spartan body. Now, for starters, this has kind of been like a mythical thing in the annals of modern fitness ever since the movie 300 came out, made by Zack Snyder, starring Gerard Butler. Excellent film for anyone who hasn't seen it on the off chance. However, when that movie came out, a lot of people kind of were blown away by the bodies of the actors portraying Spartans in the movie. And many people thought that they were unrealistic or, just simply like steroid built physiques. But in reality, when we look at history and how Spartans work with contemporary sources, with archaeology and with their training style, we see that those bodies really were not unrealistic at all. Sure, there was theatrical lighting and they had the makeup on and all that, but like if you look at those guys' bodies, none of them were a 300-pound Ronnie Coleman just juiced to the gills, like, impossible to achieve natural status. These guys were all very functionally fit, very like lean and athletic, with a pretty good distribution of muscle throughout the body in terms of like the prime drivers, not a bunch of vanity muscle, but strong glutes and shoulders and triceps. So when you look at those, it actually, the bodies of the actors in 300 actually portray, or they show a pretty decent idea of what actual Spartans may have looked like. And a physique like that is certainly achievable for you if you're willing to put the time and effort in to achieve it. And this is exactly how we're going to do that. For starters, the ancient Greeks ate 4 meals per day with wheat as their main staple crop, a lot of dried fruit, and a decent amount of fish if you were Athenian or you were in a coastal area, and a pretty good like assortment of vegetables. Like, it wasn't a bad diet at all. However, the Spartans kind of took it to another level. For starters, they only ate 2 meals per day, and instead of wheat, they ate a lot of barley. Barley was generally seen as the food of slaves and peasants and whatnot back then, but the Spartans knew that it was actually a nutrient-dense superfood. And if you do want to learn more about this, be sure to check out my recent video on ancient Spartan diet, because I do a much deeper dive into how Spartans ate, how it affected their training, their physiques, and how you yourself can eat like a Spartan in the modern age. But on the whole, their diet played a big part in their physiques, because ancient Greeks, on the whole, they were known for being very aesthetic people. Like their society, like, in many ways like our own, placed a lot of value on looking good. So having a lean physique, athletic build, and good muscles, big muscles, was it was considered like a highly prized trait in a man. So on the whole, the ancient Greeks, they looked very good, but the Spartans took it to another level entirely. And we know this because there are plenty of sources from ancient Greece talking about how the Spartans were known for being incredibly lean, lean and athletic. Probably not a huge amount of bulk. You're not going to see like guys walking around much built like The Rock per se. These guys were lean, wiry, and ready for battle. 2 meals per day, nutrient-dense superfoods, a ton of training in these specific ways that we're about to cover that definitely made these physiques possible, made them look the way they do. Because if you look at like someone who builds big, soft, fluffy muscles, just doing like light dumbbells in a gym and a steroid cycle per se, that muscle is going to look different than someone who is doing a lot of like intense, functional, fast twitch type work, doing a lot of literal combat style training that develops certain muscles, certain like ligaments and attachments differently than typical gym training. And you can oftentimes see that in people. For instance, the first time I went on Mark Bell's podcast a couple years ago, and Sima Yang, one of the other podcast hosts, who himself, he's just a super jacked dude. He was looking at my arms at the time, and he was like, couldn't get over how some of the weird some of the muscles were. He's like, you have like muscles that shouldn't be like extra muscles like in your arms. And I was like, oh yeah, I don't know, I didn't really think much of it at the time. But since now, like, I know that I grew up doing wheelbarrows and shovels, living on a farm, and I grew up wrestling from a very young age and bear hunting in the mountains with my dad's, carrying a heavy pack and doing a lot of things that kids my age weren't doing. And it definitely affected the way that my muscles developed. And now, I train much in the same way. For instance, a Spartan practice that I myself like to use is just taking a piece of rebar and bending it and straightening it over and over again. I mean, rebar, you can go down to Home Depot and get some for super cheap, or just pick some up from an old construction lot if it's been discarded. And this is just a great way to build grip and forearm strength. And this is something that ancient Greek boxers did back in the day a lot. Not rebar particularly, but metal bars of different types. So it's like training in these super specific and functional ways develops muscles differently than fluffy bodybuilding exercises in the gym. And the Spartans were the kings of that. And if you guys are enjoying this video, be sure to hit that subscribe button real quick. Back to the Spartans. Spartan training was legendary throughout the ancient world, and it still is today. And modern gym goers and athletes have a lot that we can learn from studying them. Specifically, one way that the Spartans built their legendary physiques in terms of balancing both having a good amount of muscle and being just extremely lean, was energy systems training. Now, the human body has 3 energy systems for producing energy when we exercise. Your creatine phosphate system for explosive, rapid movement, your anaerobic system for kind of your middle range stuff like weightlifting and tempos, and then your aerobic system for your slower training like hiking, rucking, running at slower paces. Spartan training addressed all 3 of these things. For starters, as we cover in my 70 Days in Sparta training program, they used all sorts of explosive athletic movements like jumps and sprints, but they also ran tempos and built that medium range endurance. And that's kind of the training that you want to do to like get rid of that burn effect. Like if you've ever done martial arts or running or really anything sustained and you feel that burn in your muscles, that is the range where you want to train to address that. And then, of course, Spartans did a ton of long-distance running and even more than that, rucking and weighted marching. And that would have addressed their aerobic training system. So most modern gym goers aren't addressing all 3 of these. We would just like simplify it by saying slow cardio, medium cardio, and fast cardio. But by addressing all 3 of these, you're not only optimizing your fat burning and really getting that ripped, super lean physique, but you're also optimizing your long-term health and your athletic performance. If you think of like a robot that has 3 different energy systems, it's not going to be as strong if only one of those or 2 of those is functioning optimally. If you have all 3 energy systems, you got nuclear, you got gas, and you got electric, boom, then you're blasting on all cylinders and you're pretty much unstoppable at that point. Another one that I really have to focus on for muscle building that most modern bodybuilders aren't even aware of is the fact that you have 3 different types of muscle fibers, to be very general. Slow twitch, fast twitch, and super fast twitch, for lack of a better term. Most typical gym movements for bodybuilding are slow isolation movements using dumbbells, barbells, stuff like that. That's excellent for isolating and inflating muscle. The problem is you're only training one of the 3 types of muscle fibers, okay? You're only training your slow twitch. So that is why if you look at like a typical gym bro who's really ripped and big and bulky, and then compare him to say an Olympic sprinter, the muscles look different. The sprinter looks dense. It's almost like he's chiseled from marble, while the other guy looks like he's big, puffy, and made from meat. This is because the sprinter has trained all types of muscle fibers, not just its slow twitch. So Spartan training and that famous Spartan physique really came from the fact that they were training all 3 types of muscle fibers. And again, if you're interested in training like this with any structure, I highly recommend you check out my 70 Days in Sparta training program. It is the only historical reconstruction of Spartan training on planet Earth, and it lays everything out step by step for anyone who does want to train like an actual Spartan. Now, 2 things that I do not want to skip over are something called passive movement, or what we would call today NEAT, non-exercise active thermogenesis, or it's basically your step count or how many calories you burn just doing passive stuff throughout the day. Now, when I was reconstructing the Spartan training method, one thing I noticed is there was no downtime in their day. Even when they weren't training, they were always doing something. Rucking, marching, dancing, hunting, some form of physical or even movement-based activity, and they were never sitting still. Unlike most of us today who might exercise well, eat well, and then spend most of our day at the computer wondering why we're not losing weight, that's why. I mean, you can exercise pretty well, eat pretty good, and still not have a 6-pack. And a lot of times, right, more than any other reason, it comes down to people just not moving much throughout their day, not having a very active lifestyle. The next thing is Spartans recovered like champions. This came from their knowledge that Basically, your recovery was as important as your training, and they were massive overtrainers, which meant they needed to recover to equal proportions. And they did this by essentially cutting out everything else in their life. All they did was train. They would eat together, they trained together, they would go back and see their families from time to time, but their entire life revolved around training. I'm not saying you have to do this, I'm not saying you have to cut everything out of your life, but what I am saying is consider what things are standing in the way of your training, whether you're drinking too much, staying out too late, hanging out with people who aren't really focused or aren't dialed in. All of these things can make a very big impact on you building a Spartan physique, on you being a good athlete, you being successful in life. So I highly recommend that whatever you take away from this video, you consider that. And most importantly, if you want to train like a real Spartan, I will link my 70 Days in Sparta training program below. And I hope you guys tune in for more videos about ancient warrior training, ancient warrior diets, mindsets, all sorts of cool stuff that I'm going to be covering in my coming videos. So tune in, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.